Hi, this is Jennifer Moore at the Mosby Heritage Area Association, coming to you today from North Hill in Clarke County. North Hill is located at the crossing of the Route 7 bridge and the Shenandoah River. If you're driving west on 7 and you look up high on the hill to your left, you'll see the big white house, and that's North Hill. Let me give you a little background on the neighborhood here at North Hill. Of course, we have the Shenandoah River, we have the Berryville Pike, and two large plantations more or less as neighbors. First being the Retreat, which was home of Judge Richard Parker, who later would hear the trial of John Brown after his 1859 Harper's Ferry raid. Also nearby was the Cool Spring Plantation. In 1748, the area is referred to as Williams Ferry. We know Williams Gap a little north of here also at that time. Then by 1760, the area is referred to as Snickers Ferry and Tavern. Edward Snickers ran a tavern, and we know that George Washington wrote of repeated crossings here across the Shenandoah at Snickers Ferry, and he also stayed at Snickers Tavern between 1769 and 1774. In 1774, the original log portion of the house here at North Hill was built. Moving on until the late 1700s, the first quarter of the 1800s, the property was owned by Charles and Betty Lewis Carter. Betty Lewis Carter was the daughter of Fielding Lewis and Betty Washington Lewis of Kenmore in Fredericksburg, Virginia, which is a National Register of Historic Places listed home. So Betty Washington Lewis was the sister of George Washington, and it was her daughter, Betty Lewis Carter, who lived here at North Hill with her husband, Charles Carter, and they are both buried here at North Hill. So George Washington's niece is buried here at North Hill. So in 1830, we know that David Castleman has taken ownership of North Hill and of the ferry. David Castleman was president of the Snickers Gap Turnpike Company, and we know that the Snickersville Turnpike, as it's called today, runs from Bluemont to Aldie nearby. And he was the one who in 1845 put on the brick large addition here at North Hill with the chimneys. A little after that, in the 1850s, his nephew, James Castleman, inherits the ferry and the property here. And James Castleman is the president of the Shenandoah Steamboat Company, and he runs a steamboat operation down here at the ferry, and he runs his own steamboat, which you guessed it was named the Shenandoah. So by the time of the Civil War, James Castleman again is the owner. Here on the hill of North Hill, we know that in the July 17th and 18th, 1864, war for Snickers Gap and the Cool Spring Battle, that here on this hill there were two Confederate artillery guns positioned pointing out at the seas of blue coming down the Berryville Pike. So when I was a kid, one of the big things to do was hiking at the Appalachian Trail to Bear's Den. If you're standing at that rock feature at Bear's Den and you look at about the 11 o'clock position, you can see Castleman, 1876, carved in old 19th century handwriting script. So at some point, one of the Castlemans did go up to Bear's Den and carve their name. So a little bit later on, we're about 1900 now, a lot of the commercial and industrial hub down here at the ferry crossing has sort of waned. A lot of the commerce and business being conducted along the Shenandoah River has instead moved more to railway. But what an interesting new business venture that was happening here at Castleman's Ferry were Washingtonians arriving in the area to escape the heat and humidity of the city and the bad air and that sort of early 1900s get back to nature feeling. And so there was a lot of resorts in the area, particularly up Raven Rocks Road, and again across 7601, the Blue Ridge Mountain Road. There were several resorts that people could arrive by train. And they had a European flair, a lot of a Swiss Alps style of architecture. Here at North Hill, the owner in 1935 was Lily Livingston, and she added a little hotel in the back called Castleman's Inn and Summer Resort. She also added this ballroom in 1935 and the Tiffany glass window. That is a Tiffany glass window, so it was a very fine resort. In the 1950s, we know the owners were Milton and Grace Ritzenberg, and Milton Ritzenberg was the president of the Virginia Thoroughbred Association, and he owned several successful race horses. So Grace and Milton Ritzenberg, we know, had a race training track down at the lowlands along the Shenandoah River here at North Hill. And if you're kayaking or floating the river today, or even if you just go right down under the bridge at the boat launch, you can still see that race training track down at the bottomlands. So in the 1970s, here and at neighboring Cool Spring, which is now the Holy Cross Monastery Abbey. Native American Paleo-Indian artifacts are turning up along the river. I don't know if there was flooding or maybe a real boost in gardening activities, but it was quite significant in the 1970s, and the Park Service actually refers to this as the Ritzenberg site because of having 2 Clovis points found here. So we have a ton of history, very early history, and also some modern history. Thank you for tuning in today from North Hill.